Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes of veteran mental health. I'm your host, Duane. Let's get ready to make sure that your headspace and timing is set correctly. Hey everybody, welcome to Headspace and Timing. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for checking us out. As many of you who serve know, the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal, is one of the greatest weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing isn't set right, however, it's just a huge chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing's not set correctly either. That's my mission here, to raise awareness about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week we'll talk about different aspects of veteran mental health and interview mental health professionals that are working with veterans, service members, and their families around the country. So, hey folks, this is Duane. Thank you for joining us again on the Headspace and Timing podcast. I got a guest here today that I think Mark and I have known each other, since 2013, going on 5 years so Marc Scroggins is here. I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about his background and what he's doing. So, Mark, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Marc Scroggins, and I joined the military back in 1979, and I retired in 2000. And during that time, I experienced several different traumas that haunted me until I did something about it. It led to substance abuse with alcohol, and I had to save myself from myself. That's just the reality. We need to save ourselves from ourselves.
So you weren't a mental health professional when you were in the Army, like me, right? People call us unicorns. We weren't therapists. We weren't docs when we were in the Army. We were some totally different MOS, and then we got out and became mental health professionals. So what was your MOS?
I was a combat engineer.
Okay.
And I was awesome. A lot of times I was an augmentee to a larger unit. My specialty was explosives, booby traps and explosives. And we developed back in Hohensfeld, for the people that know where that's at and spent some time there, we developed different tables for sapper teams. And they could qualify as a sapper team, and that incorporated booby traps, mines, different types of unconventional explosives. That's what I dealt with when I was in the service.
You kind of fall into that category of, that Cold War era veteran. I joined in 92, but, getting out before the Colt 9/11 thing, that's something that I see as a professional. Is we focus a lot on Vietnam vets, Gulf War vets, maybe going the way of Korean War vets as far as the forgotten war, and then a lot of focus, of course, now. What are your thoughts on those gap years, that Cold War veterans?
Well, I volunteered to go over to Desert Storm, and I served during Bosnia and Kosovo. It's the unspoken war. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that don't talk about what was going on over in Bosnia and Kosovo. At the time, I was stationed in Europe under the 16th Engineers. We went over and we found ourselves in a quagmire of mud and
literal quag, yeah, not the quagmire of the Middle East, but like up to your knees. Yeah, absolutely.
Up to your knees in mud, where we had bridges that were destroyed that needed to be. We needed to make sure that we created an opportunity for us to get over the river, and we had some people that got run over. We had some people there was a lot of things that go on just in the military service itself that can be very traumatic for people. I've had people run over by tanks. Some guys were playing games, and I'm talking about some of my events, so if you just bear with me, it's kind of tough. even now to talk about. But a sprocket off an M60 tank sheared off and flew down through the motor pool and impaled a guy. I was in the motor pool at the time. I was a first responder to him, and he died the next day, even after all of my efforts to try to help him out. What led me into the mental health field was that I found out mentally the struggles that I were having was because I wasn't addressing them. Mm-hmm. I was avoiding. I was avoiding talking about it. What has helped me is being able to talk about it. And I needed to make a change. I was drawn to the correctional field and used to enjoy going to work every day and rolling around in the dirt with people that are actually in the prison system. I did that for 5 years as I was going to graduate school and did a lot of introspection, internal reflection of oneself. And I came to find out that I was just as messed up as everyone else.
Only they were inside. Yeah, they were in and you were out, but you could have been just as easily one of them.
Absolutely. And that led to drinking. It led to a lot of different issues that I needed to address for myself. So a lot of soul searching has led me into the profession that I'm in now, and I try to help others.
So you're a licensed professional counselor. You're a mental health counselor, but you're also a master addiction counselor.
Correct.
Right. So primarily, or not primarily, but your specialty is substance abuse. I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Substance abuse for me, as I look back on my life, I've been clean and sober for 17 years, but I've been down in the pits of the holes that we create ourselves through our substance use, and I was able to, someone threw me a rope, and I made the decision to climb the rope, to climb back out of that hole, because I realized at some point where it was affecting my family, it was affecting my relationship, my marriage, and I needed to do something about it. So I had to take charge of me and make those changes.
It's interesting. Somebody threw you a rope, but now you're the other guy on the other end of the rope,
That's
throwing
correct.
back down. But also for you, it was you have to want it. You have to want to grab the rope and climb out. We see a lot of veterans that the rope's dangling there and they don't grab it.
That's part of the avoidance, and I've worked in the Veterans Trauma Court for going on 8 years now. Meeting with individuals and just continually extending that rope to them. And they may not want to grab it initially, but when they see, and I can be as genuine as I can be with sharing and disclosing some of my story with them, they soon realize that I was in that hole. Mm-hmm. And I know what's in that hole. I can describe it. I can define it.
You know all the corners, right?
Right.
And what's in the corners.
So that helps allow them to open up, and there's an automatic connection because I'm a veteran also, brothers and sisters in arms, so that helps also.
Right. Now, and we talked a little bit before this, but PTSD and TBI, those are the huge ones. Everybody says PTSD and TBI, and we focus on it. But for veterans out there, even for other professionals, what about substance abuse separate from PTSD and TBI as its own separate challenge? Do you need to be traumatized to be, gripped by substance abuse? And then we can talk about substance abuse. It's not just alcohol. I mean, what is the wide range of what veterans are experiencing?
Veterans are experiencing, there's an opioid epidemic that most professionals are aware of, and it leads to abuse and addiction over time. That has been my experience, and it's an escape from their own reality. Veterans don't like to be afraid of anything, and I think what scares veterans more than anything is their inner self, and coming clean with that, and realizing that I may be just as messed up as the other guy. And coming to grips with that and having some, not situational awareness, but self-awareness, the internal self. I deal with that a lot. Those were my struggles. So that's a strong point of mine that I try to endear to others, that I can relate. And the addictions can be medically induced, where the veteran thinks they're doing the right thing because the doctor told me to take these pills, right? And this is what it will do. But over time, as the body builds up tolerance, what will happen is it may require for you to take more pills.
Yeah, addiction to dependence and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of that is, and it allows the veterans to escape reality. I think is the point, their own personal reality.
There's a lot of we drink a lot in the military. I don't know of whatever, I was a 19-year-old in Germany in the mid-90s myself, and drinking age was, non-existent, and there's a culture of, our grog bowls and everything else. Is that a contributor, and when do you think, as a substance abuse professional or even as a veteran, does it hit the line of going too far?
I think it hits the line of going too far, and you don't realize that it's gone too far. You still think that you're under control. That's what's so mysterious about addictions, is that you feel as though you're still in control, even though you're not. Other people see it, but you don't see it. That contributes a lot to the suicide rate. When people get into an altered state of mind using a substance, there are times where you truly don't know what you're doing. You're acting out of normal character, or you've become this alter ego, or this different person. It allows you to do that. My question for those veterans is, what are you running from? And if you never address it, you'll continue to run for the rest of your life.
And a lot of times they don't know what they're running from. They, like you said, they don't have that internal self-awareness of, what am I really running from? The shadow that it casts is enough to make me run away, but the actual thing the shadow is casting isn't that bad.
One of the basic understandings of human beings is we are creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. So if I have a habit or start to create a habit with an addictive substance, it won't be long before the addictive substance is in charge and I'm no longer in charge. The problem is are you able to realize it at that point? And when you get to an altered state, you really can't realize that. And I find that true with a lot of people that share in the programs that I run. I wasn't even aware of what I was doing when they're in their real self versus the altered state.
I think the military, they give us the ability to stretch to our strength and capacity. Basic training, you don't think you can get through it, but it puts you to the point is, your capacity for enduring this is a lot greater than what you might think. And the military does a great job, but there becomes a point where we think we have more capacity for enduring stuff than we actually do. Right, we go out the other side, right?
Correct.
And so we think, okay, it's 3 drinks or halfway down the bottle. I'm in control one step beyond. I'm not aware of my own boundaries of capacity, basically. I see that with especially like you said, in myself and stuff like that, going beyond the pain and hurting. But even with mental health, is they think they have the capacity to endure things and they really don't. It's the same thing kind of in addiction, sounds like.
Well, what happens in addiction is what usually puts the brakes on for people that are in addiction is incarceration. They will go and go and go until they do something in the altered state that is illegal. And for a lot of veterans who aren't willing to see that in themselves and seek help, that allows a gateway for us to sort of get those people in and mentor those people and try to work with them to have that level of insight. It's real important initially to allow them to understand their own personal insight, to get them to look inside of themselves.
And a lot of times, like you said, that comes from an external place.
Right.
Somebody tells you need to go get help. If it's not, our wife or our husband or whatever else saying, hey, do something, or I'm going to leave you, or, look, you really need to get mom, dad, brother. It might be the cop or it might be the judge finally saying that, but it's a external, in what I hear you saying, it's something external that brings the veteran to its own awareness. How can we shift that?
It's very difficult to shift because we're creatures of habit.
Yeah.
It falls back to the creatures of habit. If I can do something to avoid pain, I'm going to do that. Instead of going through, I try to go around. The problem is there is no around in addiction. You have to work through it.
So that's and that's interesting. Addiction is any other obstacle, but you think you're negotiating an obstacle, you're going around the pit instead of through the pit or whatever. But like you said, with addiction, there is no other way to conquer the obstacle than to meet it head on.
Correct. And I've been clean and sober for 17 years, and I'm still afraid of alcohol today.
Healthy fear. I mean, and it's that healthy respect of the damage. Just like in you as a combat engineer, you probably feared the explosives because you knew exactly the danger of what it was, and it leads to a healthy respect.
But the alternative thought is I have to look at myself as less than. Veterans have trouble doing that.
Yes.
They have trouble with the introspection and looking at themselves as making a mistake as a human being because of this expertiseism that has been ingrained in us. It needs to be 6 inches, not 6 inches in a 16th.
Right.
Right? I mean,
it needs to be exactly. Oh, yeah, exactly.
So this expertiseism and being on point and exactly where I need to be and doing the right thing, and all of this is ingrained in us as veterans. And when something happens that goes against the grain, at what point do I become willing to look at that, if it's my internal self, or avoid it by going out and getting caught up in drinking and all of these other things? So I think that's a big deal because of the guilt and shame that we place upon ourselves for not being perfect.
Right. And this is another big thing of it gets a lot more complicated, again, than just PTSD and just TBI, than just trauma that happens. But it's moving from one culture to the other. We're no longer veterans, or we're no longer service members. You and I are no longer soldiers. We're no longer senior non-commissioned officers. We are this weird thing that nobody knows what to do with called a veteran, right? We don't fit in with the civilians, and we're no longer part of who we were, and so there's an identity shift.
Well, not only that, the identity shift, but the guilt and shame that we internalize
right
inside of ourselves for not being on point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or being at the top of my game, or being able to understand that thing that you call a veteran, right? And our willingness to kind of get inside and clean up our own castle, right?
Right.
Most veterans are very good about sharing with other people how they can spruce up their castle.
Absolutely, I hear you.
And that's an easy out for veterans. But cleaning up your own castle is something that's very, very difficult, and probably the hardest thing that I have ever had to do. I was Drill Sergeant of the Year. I taught at the Drill Sergeant Academy for several years. I've taught all the leadership courses from ANOC to the First Sergeant's course and different things. And I was very driven when I was in the military.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all about serving my inner ego, which I didn't have as a child. I was a middle child. So as I worked back through my own issues, I have been able to identify those and address those. And that is what is enabling me to manage not only staying clean and sober, but going to CPT programs. And I think the program is like 10 or 12 weeks, and I was in it for 6 months. Because I wasn't willing to let go of some of this stuff that was so close to me. The most important thing, one of the most important things that I ever learned how to do is to cry like a man.
That's interesting.
Learning how to allow yourself to have emotion.
I think a lot of veterans have emotion, but it's like one of two, right? It's lust or anger or something. You know, he said veterans are familiar with emotion. But they think the negative emotions, love and concern and things like that.
It's mislabeled.
Right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So learning, and we as human beings, as we evolve, we learn these processes. And I spent 21 years in the military, so I learned a dysfunctional process.
Which was functional while we were in.
Right, absolutely.
It was environmentally functional,
absolutely.
But we couldn't transfer that to a different environment.
So, how old? Let's see, I was 44 years old before I allowed myself to cry.
That's huge.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Sticking to something that wasn't working for me, even though I knew that it was in my best interest. What I did was I did some introspection, and that internal drive to succeed gave me purpose. Service and veterans that have purpose are headed in the right direction. When you were in the military, and you and I were in the military, we had a mission, we had a task, we had purpose, right?
Right.
So as they transition, or as we transition out of the military, there's a lack of purpose. I found that I had misguided purpose when I first retired, when I was drinking, and I enjoyed going to work at the penitentiary, believe it or not.
No, because it fulfilled a need, and you were still able to use that dysfunctional system to do kind of what you were doing before.
I was a great fit.
Yeah.
I was either happy or very angry. Most of the time, very
and happy being angry.
Happy being angry, right. But that was my system. And that was a system that's how I was hardwired. I like to address it as being hardwired that way. I don't blame that on the military because it served me well while I was there.
Absolutely.
But as I transitioned into civilian life, I found that I was unregulated with regards to emotion.
So how do you help a veteran get to that point? We talked a little bit about this again before we started recording, but when you get a veteran who's there is like, you know, I'm not going to cry. I see the tissues over there. I don't know why they're here because I'm not going to use them. You know, sunglasses on all the time. Whatever barriers that are there. How do you help a veteran in your own particular way get to that point?
Once and a rapport is established fairly quickly with me and another veteran, because they're brothers and sisters. There's just this level of understanding from one veteran to another. One of the techniques that I use is, instead of having the tissues on the shelf, I bring them to the forefront. Well, after they sit down, I just go ahead and bring the tissues out and set them in front of them. And I let them know it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. And I disclose a little bit about my story. The first time I was able to cry, I was 44 years old. And man, I had all of this stuff just I was wound tight, real tight. And until I started letting go of some of that stuff, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't sought treatment. And I kind of hesitate to think of what might have happened.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's
So-
that anticipated path. But a lot of veterans are on that anticipated path.
That's true.
Of what happens when you're not working with someone that understands, that's a mental health professional and that knows the techniques. A lot of times you can find a lot of what you and I know on the internet. It's Google, right? It's a big search engine or whatever. But the benefit of you being a veteran, me being a veteran, and having lived experiences, we also have the clinical training to be able to say we know what these tools and we know how to apply them. Mm-hmm. You were talking earlier about what was the one question that you have for veterans, the one thing that you think that every veteran needs.
The one question I think that every veteran should be posed with is what happened, and that opens the door for them to share their process, and it gives me a entry into their process with regards to you were this hard-charging soldier that made it through basic training, you were able to endure, you were adaptable, you were all of the things that you need to be in the civilian environment to be productive, to be anything that you want to be. What happened?
Yeah, what went wrong? At what point did something kind of go off the rails? When we first started talking about it, I was thinking, yeah, that makes sense. What happened in Iraq? What happened in Afghanistan? What happened in Bosnia? Yeah, that's a piece of it, but that's not all of that question. What happened? Yeah, that happened, and then what happened? And what's the story?
Right, and they will share with you. They'll start opening up after they know that you're listening to their story. One is there's a trust issue, that barrier that has to be broken down. Two, I think it's important that you're genuine with veterans, because veterans can see through that.
But yeah, I smell BS a mile away.
Right, because they've lived it.
Right. Yeah, that's because that's where they.
But yeah, so they're very in tune to what's happening in the session. So professionals need to understand that they're meeting with someone that's really going to be looking for cues to enable them to trust them with their story.
Now, do you think, and you had mentioned it a couple times, and I see it, you walk into my office and it looks like a retired first sergeant's office, maps on the walls and stuff like that. And a lot of that is, like you said, it's a shortcut to rapport. They don't know what's going to happen the first time they walk in that door. They come in, they're like, oh, okay, this guy might, understand what's going on. Do you believe that a veteran can only see a mental health provider who's another veteran?
No. What I believe is that you need to share with the veteran that you can be sympathetic, not empathetic. If you're outside the brother or sisterhood, if you're inside of it, you can empathize if you've had similar situations that you've endured. So I think that's real important for that to be very clear. The first thought of the veteran is, I share my story and you can't relate to it.
Right, yeah.
If you can show sympathy or demonstrate sympathy, that's going to help break down that barrier. I think that's real important. The difference between being able to empathize with someone having a similar situation and demonstrating sympathy to the degree where you understand and want to hear the story.
So that's on the provider side, the provider who may not be a veteran, but obviously they're working with veterans, they're concerned, they want to help. What about the veteran side? What about that idea of a veteran saying, well, I can only go see another 11 Bravo, or I can only go see another Marine for my therapist, or whatever. What about that idea on the veteran side?
I do supervision for master's level students, and they're not all veterans.
Right.
So one of the things that I share with them is to be present, be genuine, and that will break down a lot of barriers. They came to see you for a reason. They want to be heard. They don't want to be talked down to or talked to.
So the veteran, saying, well, I need to have, I need to see, if they're not a combat vet, then I don't want to be involved with them or something like that. Where do you think that comes from?
I think the trust issue. I got your back mentality.
Yeah.
And how much of this are you going to share with others? And the confidentiality that needs to be clearly understood, that you're going to guard that, or the veteran needs to believe that. I think the reason why it took me so long to get through my PTSD issues and process, and I had some skewed thoughts with reference to the person that I saw wasn't a veteran. It was a doctor out of Salt Lake City, Utah. And she broke down those barriers just by being present. And we really didn't get into anything until after I had been seeing her for like a month or a month and a half.
Yeah.
So I really, I was very hesitant to share my story and the different events that I experienced when I was in the service. But then I became comfortable with her. I had some of those same doubts, some of those same thoughts. There's no way that you can connect to this. I'll share a story and you won't believe it. Or
you're going to break down and cry, and I'm not going to, or
Right.
whatever. If this is this horrible for me, how, I can imagine that a civilian's not going to be able to. And those sound like barriers.
Well, not only that, but I had an internal barrier in that I felt initially, I was brought up in I want to say the older Army, where sharing something like that constituted you as being a liability, not an asset.
You don't want to be known as a sick call ranger or that guy that can't be counted on or something like that, sure.
I don't want to be the therapist that has a hair trigger.
Yeah. That
people need to worry about. Losing his cool and start throwing chairs or whatever,
right.
Having an episode. So it was real important that I sought out that treatment. And my hope for all veterans is that they will look inside of themselves and go get the help that they know that they need. And what I share with most veterans in some of my groups and in my individual sessions is I initially want to know exactly what they're not willing to do.
No, that's sort of putting the tissue right in front of them, right? And that's let's find out what your worst fear is, and then
it's a clear indicator. Absolutely, what they need to be doing.
Right.
It's exactly what they don't want to do. The whole avoidance piece, and veterans have across the board have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few challenges that are more significant to the veteran community than the epidemic of veteran suicide. What are your thoughts on it, and what can we as mental health professionals do to impact it?
I've had several individuals that were on the brink of suicide that I've been able to talk to, and I use a strength-based approach with them. I try to help let them see the strengths that they truly have, and that they've demonstrated in the past, and try to harness that from within them and bring that out, so that when they leave after this session, they feel empowered. I think that's real important.
One of the biggest things out of the 2016 suicide study was that a large number of veteran suicides are older. They're not the younger OIF, OEF veterans, but they're age 50 or older, 50 to 65. Mm-hmm. That they're squarely in now. That Cold War veteran kind of band. What do you think about that?
My thoughts about that is they've become very good, almost experts at avoiding what they really need to work on. When I meet with someone in that age group, I'm very, very careful to empower them with their strengths and identify those. And a lot of them have lost a sense of purpose.
Yeah, maybe they're not working anymore, or they're not. Yeah, got you.
So maybe I'll talk to them about how would you feel about volunteering? How would you feel about different things that could bring out strengths that they have demonstrated in the past?
So as we're wrapping up here, are there any other questions that you could think? You got an audience of veterans and professionals. What did I not ask that you would like to get out there?
I think it's real important to understand that veterans are human beings. I think it's real important to understand the dynamics of being a human being. A veteran is like a fireman or like a policeman. It's just something that you've done.
Yeah.
But you're still human. We're all human. So we are connected at that point with regards to human instincts, how we develop habits. Habits can be broken or changed. You just have to commit to the change process. And just kind of let them know that help's out there. They just have to come and seek it. Seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of inner strength.
Yeah, that's a paradox a lot of veterans aren't aware of, is the fact that by reaching out and saying, you know what, I've reached my limit, that actually shows that you're more resilient, not less resilient.
Correct. Right.
In buying into the label of veteran, you know, that's I've talked with many. The stereotypes that we have, we're either a victim, right? You know, a broken-winged bird that you know, that someone needs to save, or a lot of the veterans you and I work with in the veteran court that we're villains, right? We're criminals in some sense. That comes out every time something bad happens. Or that we're some kind of mythic hero, right? You know, striding across the land, saving people. When we're none of those, we're human.
Right. We're human, and I like to view this as life is full of moments. We have good moments, we have bad moments. The people that I see primarily in the Veterans Trauma Court.
Excuse me for interrupting. Can I turn on some lights?
You can. We actually, the lights just went out. We're actually recording a podcast here. We're trying to.
Okay.
Yeah, the lights went down, and we're not sure why they went out, and we're just trying to soldier on without them.
Okay.
So, our lives as human beings are filled with moments, and we all have good moments and we have bad moments. The good moments are easy to deal with. It's the bad moments and what we do about those that clearly define us throughout our lifetime. I'm a firm believer in that. We all make mistakes. We're humans. It's by design, in my opinion, that no one is perfect. And if you are to calculate all the good moments versus the bad moments, the good moments will, for most people, will be many more good moments in your life than bad moments.
They'll be more numerous, and they will carry more weight, right? They'll have both breadth and depth.
And they can give you strength.
Absolutely. So if you had a veteran, right, you know, somebody walks up to us and sitting here saying, okay, why should I bother? Why should I go to a shrink? Why should I go see a therapist? I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Although there maybe obviously is. What would you say to that veteran?
I would share with them initially that I want to help you. And I try to measure 4 different categories. Are you willing and able? Are you unwilling but able? Are you unwilling or unable? And where do I meet you at? So once I can assess where they're at with regards to willingness and their ability, their mental capability, I try to arrive beside them, kind of like penguins and how they take care of their young. Mm-hmm. When their skin isn't thick enough to embrace the Arctic cold, whether you're the father or mother, it doesn't matter. They get in a circle and they take all the young ones and put them in the middle when the Arctic cold blows until they're enabled. They enable them and they grow up enough to take their turn in the outer ring to protect the other youngs that are coming up. So that's kind of how I see it.
And that's a support. And I think, and you alluded to it earlier, veterans want to help other veterans.
Absolutely.
We need to make sure that we're stable so we don't get pulled back down into those pits and things like that. But and that's really interesting. I'm gonna capture those 4 categories, make sure that they're in the show notes. How can people reach out to you, right? How can they reach out and contact you? Would you want that, or what other kind of things would you have for the listeners to be able to follow up with?
Well, we have for all veterans every Wednesday. We over at the VA we have an open clinic where none of the therapists that work there have scheduled appointments, and that time is from 12:45 to 1500 on Wednesdays. So they can come in without an appointment and see someone and talk to someone. If they want to reach me, my number is 719-227-4076. And just drop me a line. If I don't get back with you right away, I screen all my calls. I still haven't gotten away from coming into work early. So I get there at dawn and I screen all my phone calls, and I'll be sure to get back with you.
Now you had shown me a link, and your son has a project. What was it, the Horn of the Bulls, or what is it?
It's called the Heart of the Bull.
Right.
And it's a day in my life as a therapist. It was a tribute to me for my son, who's now a film director, and things that he experienced around the house, my night terrors, different things that he experienced in his own words. He wrote, directed, and also did all the cinematography for this film, and it was selected at the AMA Awards this year as honorable mention. And if anyone would like to see it, I think that you'd be able to relate to it. Just being a soldier or veteran, several veterans have come back after they viewed it and made comments to me about how powerful it was for them to know that they're not alone with regards to having night terrors and things like that.
That's great, and I'm going to make sure the link of that is in the show notes too, so that we can get that out as wide as possible. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today, Mark, and look forward to obviously you and I continuing to work together, but hopefully this has been helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.